Black man slept on plane, until the captain asked in terror, "Is there a fighter pilot on board?" Marcus Henderson had learned to sleep anywhere during his 15 years as a fighter pilot in the U.S. Air Force. At 38, he could fall asleep even in the cramped seats of economy class, a skill developed during years of missions where rest was a rare luxury. But something in the desperate urgency of the voice that echoed through the Boeing 777 sound system made him open his eyes instantly. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is co-pilot James Wilson." The trembling voice cut through the air as the aircraft flew through one of the worst storms ever recorded over the North Atlantic. "We have a serious medical emergency. Captain Mitchell is unconscious, and I need immediate assistance from anyone with combat aviation experience." Marcus slowly sat up straight in seat 24C, his military mind automatically assessing the situation. In first class, businessman William Thornton adjusted his imported glasses and muttered loudly enough for others to hear, as if anyone qualified would be traveling in economy class. His disdainful gaze swept over Marcus, who wore simple jeans and a basic t-shirt, his natural hair cut in a military style. To Thornton, he was just another ordinary passenger, probably visiting family or returning from some manual labor. Turbulence shook the plane violently as rain pounded the windows with deafening force. Among the 289 passengers, panic was beginning to set in. Children were crying, people were praying aloud, and some were already typing farewell messages on their cell phones. "Please," James' voice cracked over the intercom, "anyone with military aviation training, identify yourself immediately. We are flying blind through a Category 5 storm, and I've never faced anything like this alone." Marcus stood still for a moment, observing the terrified faces around him. He noticed how no one considered him a possibility. To them, he was just another ordinary black passenger, probably visiting family or returning from some simple job. William Thornton stood up abruptly, his chest puffed out with arrogance. "Listen here, kid," he yelled toward the cabin. "My brother-in-law is a private pilot. I've flown with him dozens of times. I can help." A flight attendant came running. "Sir, we need someone with specific military experience. Civilian training isn't enough for these conditions." "Are you doubting me?" Thornton puffed out his chest, his arrogance intact even in the face of chaos. "I paid $18,000 for these first-class seats. I have more experience than anyone on this plane." It was then that Marcus stood up quietly, his movements fluid and precise, unlike the desperate agitation of the other passengers. As he walked down the aisle toward the cockpit, some passengers watched him with curiosity, others with obvious skepticism. "Excuse me," he said to the flight attendant, his calm voice contrasting sharply with the chaos around him. "Colonel Marcus Henderson, Air Force. 1,200 hours of flight time in F-22 Raptors, expert in navigation under extreme conditions." The silence that followed was deafening. William Thornton stared at him in utter disbelief, his mouth open in shock. "You're kidding me," he muttered. But in Marcus's eyes was something that made the flight attendant take a step back. An absolute calm that only exists in those who have weathered much worse storms and lived to tell the tale. Something that suggested well-kept secrets and a silent strength that was about to be revealed. If you are enjoying this story of overcoming adversity and justice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple passenger would turn the most terrifying flight of their lives into the most epic demonstration of why we should never judge someone by their appearance. Marcus watched Thornton with a look that mixed professional patience with a hint of amusement, knowing that the next few minutes would reveal truths that no one on that plane expected to discover. The storm continued to batter the aircraft as if trying to break it in half, but Marcus remained motionless, his military bearing evident to anyone who knew how to recognize it. 15 years of flying dangerous missions had taught him that the first rule in any emergency was to remain calm. And looking at the terrified faces around him, he knew it would take more than technical expertise to save the 289 lives on board. It would take leadership under extreme pressure. "So," Marcus said calmly to the flight attendant, "can I see the cockpit now? We have a situation to deal with." His years of military command shone through in every word, a natural authority that made even the most skeptical passengers begin to pay attention. What none of them knew was that Marcus Henderson was not just a skilled pilot, he was a living legend of American military aviation, and his story was about to unfold in spectacular fashion. William Thornton's bitter laughter echoed through the cabin as the storm continued to batter the Boeing 777. "Colonel? You?" He gestured dismissively toward Marcus. "Look, I respect our military, But I'm not going to bet my life on a fantasy. My wife and I paid a fortune for these seats precisely to avoid situations like this. Other passengers began to murmur among themselves, some clearly sharing Thornton's distrust. An elderly lady in first class whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Is he really qualified? He looks so young." The subtext was clear and painful. To them, a black man in simple clothes couldn't possibly have the credentials he claimed to have. James Wilson appeared at the cabin door, his face pale with terror. "Please, anyone with military experience needs to come forward now. Captain Mitchell is having seizures, and I've never flown solo in conditions like these." "Listen here, young man," Thornton stood up again, puffing out his chest with false authority. "I've flown in private jets all over Europe. I have over 300 hours of experience as a passenger in luxury aircraft. I know all the procedures." Marcus remained silent for a moment, observing the dynamics. He had learned during years of military service that certain battles had to be chosen carefully. But when he saw the genuine despair in the young co-pilot's eyes, something inside him awakened. The same force that had sustained him during impossible missions in hostile territory. "Mr. Wilson," he said calmly, "I need to know our current altitude, speed, and exact weather conditions." "We're at 37,000 feet, speed 480 knots, crosswinds of 140 kilometers per hour with gusts up to 180, James replied automatically, recognizing the authority in Marcus's voice. Thornton let out a cruel laugh. "Impressive, he memorized some numbers from Wikipedia. That doesn't make him a pilot." It was then that Marcus did something that silenced the entire cabin. Without hesitation, he began to recite, "Emergency procedure for loss of pressurization at cruising altitude, immediate oxygen mask, emergency descent to 10,000 feet, descent angle not exceeding 12 degrees to avoid structural stress, communication with air traffic control code 7700, hull integrity check." He continued for another 2 minutes, detailing procedures that only highly trained military pilots would know by heart. The ensuing silence was broken only by the roar of the storm. James Wilson stared at him with a mixture of relief and admiration. "Sir, the cockpit is yours." But Thornton wasn't finished. "1 minute. Anyone can memorize procedures. I demand to see proper credentials before entrusting my life to someone who clearly does not belong in first class on an international flight." The words cut through the air like blades. Other passengers avoided eye contact, embarrassed but unwilling to confront the powerful man. Marcus felt the familiar burn of injustice, the same he had experienced countless times during his military career when he had to prove his competence twice as much as any white colleague. For a moment, memories flooded his mind. The first time he was questioned during a combat mission when a white colonel publicly doubted his ability to lead a fighter formation. The time he was passed over for a promotion despite having the best flight record in his class. The whispered comments about racial quotas that had followed him throughout his career. But he also remembered what had made him the most decorated pilot of his generation, the ability to turn every doubt into fuel, every insult into motivation. "Mr. Thornton," he said finally, his voice laden with a calmness that made some passengers shudder. "There are 3 kinds of pilots in this world: those who fly when it's easy, those who fly when it's difficult, and those who fly when it's impossible." He took a step toward the cockpit, then stopped. "During my career, I have saved 23 aircraft in situations that the manual said were unrecoverable." The plane dove violently, causing several passengers to scream. Marcus didn't even brace himself, maintaining his balance with the ease of someone who had faced turbulence far worse than atmospheric storms. "What qualifies me," he continued, "is not my medals or flight hours. It's that I'm the only person on this plane who has flown through a war zone with 2 engines out, navigation system destroyed, and missiles being fired at my aircraft. And yet I brought my entire squadron home." Marcus nodded and began walking toward the cockpit. But before passing Thornton, he turned one last time. "Mr. Thornton, when we reach the ground, and we will, perhaps you'll reflect on how a black man who doesn't belong in first class saved your life and that of your family." As he disappeared into the cockpit, the passengers fell silent. Some began to realize that they might have witnessed something much greater than a simple air emergency. And Thornton, for the first time in decades, felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood, the painful and inevitable feeling of being completely and devastatingly wrong about someone whose value he had underestimated based purely on prejudices that now seemed not only cruel but dangerously stupid. Inside the cockpit, Marcus Henderson faced a situation that would have sent any commercial pilot into a full-blown panic. Captain Mitchell was convulsing violently in his seat, foam coming out of his mouth as the heart monitors sounded deafening alarms. James Wilson was literally paralyzed with terror, his hands trembling over controls he could no longer operate. "First aid now," Marcus ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. He checked the captain's vital signs with the precision of someone who had treated wounded pilots in combat zones. "We have approximately 20 minutes before he goes into complete cardiac arrest," he assessed, adjusting the navigation instruments while simultaneously monitoring the captain's vital signs. "How do you know so much about emergency medicine?" James asked, impressed by how economical and precise his movements were. 15 years flying rescue missions in hostile territory," Marcus replied, calibrating the communication systems. "When you're the only person between a wounded soldier and death, you learn a few things." Meanwhile, in the passenger cabin, Thornton had convinced half of first class that they were all doomed because of an imposter at the controls. "Did you see how he was dressed?" he muttered to anyone willing to listen. "Qualified people don't travel like this," his wife Victoria, who had remained quiet until then, finally confronted him. "Thornton, stop. You're being ridiculous." "Ridiculous?" He turned to her indignantly. "I'm trying to save our lives. I'm not leaving our safety in the hands of someone who clearly—" His words were cut off by the sound of Marcus's voice over the intercom, now assuming full command. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Colonel Henderson speaking. I will be taking command of this aircraft until we reach our destination. Please remain calm and follow all instructions from the crew." The authority in his voice was undeniable. It wasn't the tone of someone trying to convince or impress, but of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Even Thornton felt an involuntary shiver. In the cockpit, Marcus had transformed James Wilson from a paralyzed co-pilot into an efficient assistant. "James, I need you to monitor our fuel and pressurization systems. I'm going to get us out of this storm, but I need accurate information every 30 seconds. "Yes, sir," James replied, his confidence returning for the first time since the emergency began. There was something about Marcus's presence that made him believe that maybe, just maybe, they could get out of this alive. Then Marcus did something that left James completely baffled. Instead of following standard emergency routes, he began mentally calculating a trajectory that seemed impossible, flying through the storm instead of trying to bypass it. "Colonel, with all due respect, this goes against all safety protocols," James protested, watching the calculations Marcus scribbled on a notepad. Marcus smiled for the first time since taking command. "James, let me tell you something. In 2019, I was leading a rescue mission in Afghanistan when our aircraft was hit by surface-to-air missiles. 2 engines failed, the navigation system was destroyed, and a sandstorm reduced visibility to 0. He continued flying as he spoke, his hands moving over the controls with mesmerizing fluidity. "The manual said to eject and abandon the mission, but there were 19 wounded soldiers depending on us. So I did exactly what I'm doing now. I threw the manual out the window and relied on experience." His words carried a weight that made James understand he was in the presence of someone truly exceptional. Sometimes, James, following the rules kills people. Knowing the rules well enough to break them at the right moment is what separates mediocre pilots from pilots who save lives. At that moment, the cabin door swung open. Thornton had managed to convince a flight attendant to let him through, claiming he had relevant experience to assess the situation. "This is pure madness," he declared, observing Marcus's unconventional calculations. "You're putting us all in danger. I demand to speak to air traffic control immediately." Marcus didn't even turn to look at him. "Mr. Thornton, this cockpit is no place for tourists. Please return to your seat." "Tourist?" Thornton's voice rose an octave. "I've flown in more private jets than you've lived. I know aviation, and what you're doing is collective suicide." That's when something interesting happened. Dr. Patricia Chun, chief of neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins Hospital, who had remained quiet until that moment, rose from first class and walked to the cockpit. "Colonel Henderson," she said calmly, "I'm Dr. Chun, a neurosurgeon. I worked for 5 years in military hospitals treating pilots with neurological injuries. I can help with Captain Mitchell." Marcus finally turned around, and the two professionals recognized each other instantly. Not personally, but as people who had dedicated their lives to saving others in extreme conditions. "Doctor, It would be an honor to have you with us. The captain is stable at the moment, but we need constant monitoring. Thornton watched this exchange with growing frustration. You've all gone mad. This is a conspiracy to kill us. Dr. Chen looked at him with the patience of someone who had dealt with hysterical family members during medical crises. Mr. Thornton, I've treated hundreds of military pilots. This woman has the kind of training that no amount of money can buy. I suggest you trust her. Trust? Thornton laughed bitterly. Based on what? His word. It was then that Marcus did something that completely changed the dynamic of the situation. Without stopping flying, he said calmly, James, please tune to Military Emergency Frequency 121.5 and identify our position to Andrews Air Force Base. Colonel Henderson to Andrews Base, requesting identity confirmation for civilian emergency, he said into the radio. The response came immediately, Colonel Henderson Phantom, is that really you? This is Commander Rodriguez, Military Air Traffic Control. We confirm your identity. Phantom, you disappeared from radar 30 minutes ago. The entire Air Force is mobilized looking for you. The cockpit fell completely silent. Thornton turned pale, finally realizing that he had completely misjudged one of the most decorated pilots in American military history. Andrews Base to Ghost, Commander Rodriguez's voice echoed through the cockpit. We have critical information. The weather system is intensifying beyond all predictions. Winds of 200 kilometers per hour, hail the size of baseballs. All airports in the region are closing their runways. You are the only aircraft still in the air. The reality of the situation hit Thornton like a punch in the stomach. They weren't just another commercial flight with technical problems. They were literally flying through a meteorological apocalypse that had shut down all airspace on the East Coast. James, Marcus said calmly, I'm going to need you to monitor our vertical speed. We're going to do something that has never been attempted in a Boeing 777. His hands danced over the controls with a precision that made it seem as if the aircraft was an extension of his own body. Colonel, what exactly are we going to do? James asked, watching indicators that suggested maneuvers impossible for a commercial aircraft of that size. Controlled spiral descent through the eye of the storm, he replied, beginning to perform mental calculations that left both James and Dr. Chen impressed. A technique developed for military fighter jets, never attempted on a civilian aircraft of this size. Thornton felt his legs buckle. During his business career, he had met some truly exceptional people, but never anyone operating at such an advanced level of competence that it seemed to transcend normal human limitations. Ghost, another military controller's voice interrupted. This is General Patricia Hayes, Pentagon Air Operations Command. We confirm that it was your mission to save 2 other aircraft during Operation Storm Shield in 2020. Is it true that you guided a malfunctioning C-130 through a sandstorm using only radio communication? Affirmative, General. Similar situation, different atmospheric variables, Marcus replied as he simultaneously adjusted flight angles that made his Boeing 777 dance through air currents that should have destroyed any aircraft. James was speechless. Colonel, you saved other planes just by giving instructions over the radio? 17 aircraft throughout my military career, he confirmed, his concentration unshaken. When you learn to see atmospheric patterns in 3 dimensions, you can guide anything that flies, even without being physically at the controls. It was at that moment that Thornton had a devastating epiphany about the true extent of his ignorance. He had judged based on appearances someone who was not only a competent pilot but a living legend of military aviation, someone whose skills were studied in academies around the world. Dr. Chen said, Marcus, I need you to monitor Captain Mitchell. What I'm about to do in the next few minutes will subject us to G-forces that could affect his medical condition. Understood, Colonel. He's stable, but you're right about the G-forces. General Hayes, Marcus continued over the radio, requesting confirmation that all civilian aircraft have been directed to alternate airports. I don't want anyone trying to follow our flight path. Phantom, you are the only thing flying in American airspace right now. We have 15 military bases monitoring your situation. The President has been personally briefed. Thornton felt the world spinning around him. The President of the United States was being briefed on the flight he was traveling on, piloted by a man he had tried to disqualify based on racial prejudice. James, I need you to take over communications with air traffic control while I execute the descent, Marcus instructed. I'm going to need total concentration on the next maneuvers. Colonel Henderson, Thornton finally spoke, his voice broken with humiliation. I need to apologize. What I said was, Mr. Thornton, Marcus interrupted him without taking his attention off the controls, your apology can wait. Right now, I need to save your life and everyone else's on board. The aircraft began a spiral descent that defied all the laws of commercial aeronautical physics. Marcus had found a descending column in the center of the storm, a relatively stable air tunnel that would allow a controlled descent below the layer of severe turbulence. My God, James murmured, watching the instruments. How did you know this current existed? 15 years flying through hostile weather systems in the Middle East, he replied. Sandstorms, artificial hurricanes created by explosions, conditions that don't exist in civilian manuals. When you survive the impossible repeatedly, the extraordinary becomes routine. Phantom, this is Commander Rodriguez. We're watching your trajectory on radar. This is impossible. How are you keeping an aircraft of this size stable while descending 5,000 feet per minute? Applied physics, Commander, and 17 years of experience turning impossible situations into safe landings. Thornton watched out the window as they descended through the eye of the storm. Lightning cut through the surrounding walls of clouds like apocalyptic fireworks, but the aircraft remained strangely stable, as if guided by forces beyond normal human comprehension. General Hayes, Marcus called over the radio, requesting coordinates for Dover Air Force Base. We will need a runway with full emergency capability and medical personnel on standby. Phantom, Dover is ready. Main runway cleared. Emergency foam being applied. Ambulances in position. You have absolute priority over all airspace. James, when we land, you'll see why they call me Ghost, Marcus said, a barely perceptible smile touching his lips for the first time since taking command. Over the next 20 minutes, Thornton would witness a display of technical skill and personal courage that would completely redefine his understanding of competence, leadership, and the true meaning of heroism. 6 months after the miraculous landing, Marcus Henderson was promoted to Brigadier General in a ceremony at the Pentagon, becoming the youngest African-American pilot in history to achieve such a rank. His storm navigation technique was incorporated into military training manuals worldwide, and 4 universities offered chairs in his name. General Henderson saved not only 289 lives that day, the Secretary of Defense declared during the ceremony, he redefined how we evaluate competence versus appearance in our armed forces. In the audience, Dr. Patricia Chun applauded enthusiastically. She had co-authored an article with Marcus on emergency aviation medicine, published in the world's most prestigious medical journal. James Wilson, now a captain, commanded his own commercial aircraft, always crediting Marcus as his greatest inspiration. He taught me that true leadership doesn't shout for recognition, it simply acts when necessary, James said in interviews. Meanwhile, William Thornton faced the reality of his choices. The video of his prejudiced comments during the emergency had leaked on social media, going viral with over 80 million views. His investment company lost 75% of its clients in 4 months, forcing him to file for personal bankruptcy. Daddy, why do people get mad when they see your name on Google? Asked his 10-year-old daughter, innocently destroying what remained of his pride. Victoria had filed for divorce, taking half of the remaining assets and full custody of the children. I married a man who admired success, she told the judge. I discovered that I had lived 18 years with someone who confuses privilege with competence. Thornton now worked as a salesman at a used car dealership, using public transportation, the same ordinary life he had once despised. Every morning, he passed a giant billboard in the city center showing Marcus in military uniform with the words, "Leadership has no color, it has character." During a lecture at the Air Force Academy, Marcus was asked by a cadet how to deal with prejudice. "Young man," he replied, "let them underestimate you. While they waste energy doubting your abilities, you use that same energy to develop skills they can never question." Marcus's story inspired an entire generation of young military personnel from minority backgrounds. His book, Flying Through the Storms, became a bestseller, with all proceeds going to aviation scholarships. 3 years later, Thornton ran into Marcus at an airport. He was wearing a general's uniform, surrounded by aides and security guards. Thornton wore his blue dealership uniform, carrying a small, inexpensive suitcase. "General Henderson," he said timidly, "I would like to properly apologize for what happened on that flight. Marcus studied him for a moment, seeing not the arrogant man from before, but someone genuinely broken by his own ignorance. "Mr. Thornton, you gave me the greatest gift possible that day." "How so?" "You reminded me why I do what I do. Every person I save, every pilot I train, every barrier I break, all of it is possible because people like you exist to motivate me to prove them wrong." Thornton nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I lost everything because of my prejudices." "No, sir," Marcus corrected him gently. "You discovered that you never had anything real to lose. Privilege is not achievement. Respect is not inheritance. Competence is not appearance." As Marcus walked away with his team, Thornton realized the hardest lesson of his life. The man he had judged incapable of flying a plane now commanded entire squadrons, while he, who considered himself superior, could barely command his own existence. Marcus's true revenge was not to destroy Thornton, but to build a legacy so brilliant that it rendered his pettiness irrelevant. He learned that success is not only the best revenge, it is the only revenge worth having. As he said in his last interview, "While they spend their time underestimating us, we spend that time making ourselves unforgettable." The story of Flight 447 became legendary in commercial aviation. Marcus had proven that in moments of true crisis, what matters is not the color of your skin or the class of your seat, but the competence and courage to act when lives are at stake. His calmness under extreme pressure saved 289 people and forever changed how the aviation industry viewed leadership in emergencies. Today, the phantom descent technique is taught in flight schools around the world. Marcus established a foundation that offers aviation scholarships to young people from minority groups, proving that talent knows no color or social class. And every time a young pilot faces discrimination, they remember the story of General Marcus Phantom Henderson, the man who slept peacefully in seat 24C until the world needed a hero. His lesson resonates to this day: never judge a book by its cover, because you may be underestimating the very person who will one day save your life. Greatness does not announce its arrival, it simply acts when needed. If this story of courage that transcends all barriers touched your heart, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who later realized they had made the biggest mistake of their life? Have you ever witnessed the moment when someone's true character was revealed in a crisis? Remember, sometimes the most powerful person on the plane is the one sleeping quietly in economy class, waiting for the right moment to show what they are capable of. Comment "Never judge" if you also believe that true greatness is revealed in actions, not appearances. See you in the next video with more stories that prove heroes can be anywhere, just waiting for their moment to shine.